I will be introducing our speaker. I will be introducing our speaker shortly, and I'm very excited that we have this great speaker again tonight. She is our member. She's our regular here. She attends as much as often as she is available. So at least it's not her first time. She understands. She knows how we do things. She knows this platform, the format, and everything. So yes, yeah. So I mean, really, we've got leaders here from all walks of life. We've got scholars here or academics from different universities. We've got politicians, members of the media. We've got executives from public sector, from private sector. We've got religious leaders, community leaders, all sorts of leaders. As I'm saying, that really this is the community of leaders. So if it's your first time joining us, a special welcome to you. We'd like to thank you very much for tuning in, and please do participate. I'd really like to encourage you to participate. Don't feel shy. Don't say that, no, it's my first time, so I just want to hear from other people. We want to hear from you. As I'm saying, that this is a safe space so you can express yourself as much as you like. Obviously, we are all professionals. As I'm saying, that we respect each other because we are peers. There is no one who's above another one. There is no one who's bigger than any other one. So we are peers here. We are all leaders. That is why we respect each other. So I wouldn't like to waste any time, as I'm saying that really others, they will be joining us. So, but we would like to give our speaker as ample time as possible, because you want to drink from this well of knowledge and of wisdom. It's my sister Paulina Mamogobo. As I'm saying that Paulina has been with us before. She not only, if I'm saying before, I'm saying as a speaker, but in terms of participating, she's with us really as much as possible and as often as possible. So those people who are regulars here will know Paulina. Paulina is a director for trade and investment promotions at UKZN Department of Environment Affairs. Department of Trade and Environment. I hope, Paulina, you'll be correcting me. So she's really a scholar. She's busy with her PhD. She's a seasoned leader. She's a coach. And I'm very happy to say that she's got a chapter in our new book that will be launched very soon. So she's got a very beautiful chapter here there. She's one of our many contributors who have contributed in this book that is to be launched very soon. The book is called Women in Leadership, Breaking the Glass Ceiling. Beautiful and a wonderful book. So without wasting any time, Paulina, let me give you this time to address us. People are waiting for you. We would like to hear from you, my sister. Thank you so much for availing yourself. I know that you are a very busy person, but thank you so much for once again availing yourself. And then we'll be tackling youth leadership, mind the gap, bridging the generational divide. As you know, you will address us, and then we'll engage with you once we've finished. Those who are here for our first time, the format is that the speaker will address us, and please do engage with the speaker. You can do that, obviously, once she has finished with her speech, and then you can raise your hand. We'll definitely recognize you, and then also you can do or you can do via our chat room. And then my sister Martha Shingange, who is with us tonight, and she'll be assisting us in dealing with the answers and questions. Martha is the Marketing and Communications Manager at Wholesale and Retail SETA, and she's if I would say she's one of our founding members of this platform, because she's been with us since we started. Paulina, over to you, my sister. Let me not waste any time, and then we'll engage with you once we've done. All the best. Thank you so much. Over to you, Paulina.
Thank you so much, Prof. I truly appreciate the warm welcome and the warm introduction. I just want to confirm with the colleagues on the platform if you're able to hear me. As you can see, I tried to wear headphones. Thank you for the thumbs up. My young people have decided to go a little wild outside. We are celebrating Youth Day in advance. So hence the reason for my headphones. Otherwise, thank you so much, Prof. Majola, for the warm introduction, as I mentioned. It is a great honor, and just for correction, I'm with the KZN Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs, and it is an honor to be able to make a contribution to this constant topic of leadership, because as much as we are able to pour out in speech or make our contributions to the topic, we also create room to be poured into, because as we understand, leadership is not a linear journey. And as we speak as unto ourselves. So this is a platform where I'll also be equally learning from you. Allow me, as I start my contribution this evening, to acknowledge the leadership of Worldwide Institute of Leadership and Development. I love the acronym because it says WILD. I love it over the fact that it allows us as young people, as leaders, to color a bit outside of the box, because sometimes if we stick to conventional norms and thinking, we don't realize the gaps or the blind spots that we could possibly be ignorant of. So this acronym always excites me, because our thought process, our thinking, our conversations allow us to color a bit outside of the box so as to gain perspective and enhance our leadership journeys. Leadership in itself, as I mentioned, is not linear. So as I start, colleagues, friends, family, leaders in leadership, as Prof. Majola would put it, good evening. I wish to make my contribution this evening under the subject Mind the Gap, Bridging the Generational Leadership Divide. As we commemorate the Youth Month in South Africa, we cannot help but still notice the divide that still exists in leadership, and particularly in the context of this conversation between the generations that currently lead, which happen to be the majority, the mature generation, as I wish to categorize them, and the gap between the young people that are still coming up. Our youth unemployment stats continue to scream in our face, very heartbreaking. Young dreams are being shattered in a country that has been over 28 years in democracy. And while we acknowledge the pockets of development and interventions that are happening in the country to empower and to support and enable our youth, we have to acknowledge more can be done. Just last week, Stats SA released the GDP figures, and it reported on a 1.9% growth in terms of our GDP growth. And while it is mentioned, I asked myself, is it really a true reflection of what is happening? What about our youth? What is their contribution to the growth and the opportunities that remain so scarce? How do we as a people mind the gap? While we mind the gap and report on the quantitative economic indicators, which contribute to the overall GDP, what about the qualitative? Do we really pay attention to this? And with this, I'm talking about the youth ambitions, the youth dreams, our young people's capabilities and abilities. And I ask myself, do we care to mind the gap? The phrase mind the gap is often used as a caution. And just to create context, if usually when you go to a train station, for those that have had the privilege of maybe boarding onto a train, be it's Metro Rail or the Gautrain, which is predominant in Gauteng, or one of the speed trains in the country actually, or maybe you've been on a train abroad, there's usually that sign of caution between the platform and the train written mind the gap. And that sign is always to caution you of that mini space between the train and the gap, that if you are not careful to pay attention to it, you bear the risk of either falling therein or maybe even dropping something valuable within there. And I wish to borrow the same phrase in my contribution and its connotation to the contribution of tonight's conversation, minding the gap. I watched the short film on YouTube by Luke Flanagan called Mind the Gap. It's a 2014 film. And in this film, there's an old lady that gets up and walks to the train station early in the morning, walks quite a couple of kilometers. And when he gets to the train station, she sits on the bench while waiting for the train to arrive. When the train arrives, it stops and it opens its doors. But instead of the old lady boarding the train, she pauses and she waits for the message that echoes in caution to the passengers that will board the train, saying, mind the gap. The old lady, frail, sits there, looks at this train until the train closes the very doors and it takes off. She then gets up and goes back to her house, perhaps to put her house in order. I do not know. And then the following morning, she gets up again, cognizant of the time at which this train will arrive once more, gets there, sits there, the train arrives, it opens its doors again, and the voice echoes, mind the gap, mind the gap. The lady sits nostalgic, and again, it's like she's thinking, do I board the train? And with having given that thought, again, she waits for the train doors to close, and then she departs, and again, she goes back home. This becomes, to an extent, a religious activity. She gets up the next morning, she goes to the same spot, sit there, quite nostalgic. The train again arrives, and it opens its doors, and the voice again echoes, mind the gap, mind the gap. On the fourth occasion, when she went to the train station, which was the following day, and still the same routine, the doors once again open, and this time it's a different voice saying, mind the gap between the platform and the train. Still, she doesn't board the train doors close. She becomes very emotional, cognizant of the fact that there are even changes in how the message is now communicated. She leaves and she rushes back home. And when I noticed, every time she went back home, she was trying to put her house in order, as if before I board the train, I need to make sure everything is okay. And I asked myself, when we think of where we have been, what has been, the communities, the families, the corporations that we have led and continue to lead, the roles we occupy in society, who we are today at this present moment as we sit on this platform, the prospect of who we will be tomorrow as individuals and as a nation, what is it that echoes in our consciences as we continue to lead? Do we care to mind the gap? Do we ever pause to think what kind of trail we are leaving behind, especially if we are continuing as we do as a nation or as individuals in our particular entities where we function every day? Are we losing more through the cracks of broken leadership? Have we considered the generations that follow? Or do we leave leadership as a notion or a concept of discovery for every generation that is to come? How do we mind the gap? As I was thinking of this topic, I thought of how many young people we are losing every day to dreams shattered, to opportunities that are closed in their faces, to gender-based violence, to crime, to disease physically, emotionally, and mentally, to abuse, to a lack of leadership, or even the misuse thereof. Do we care to mind the gap? It's sad to witness how, as we assume our leadership roles or positions in society, that we forget that the platform that we leave behind carries more people than the trains which we board with our peers as we sit in the C-suites, the boardrooms, the committees, the organizations that we actually lead in everyday society. As leaders, we always need to remember, we are empowered to empower. So always ask yourself, even in the words of Uncle Bonang Mohale, are we lifting as we rise. So as much as we look forward, let us always remember as leaders in the concept and the notion of youth leadership, that there's a young people with dreams and aspirations. Many are clutching on to hope and are depending on those like us in this platform in leadership roles to be able to create an enabling environment to bridge the gap. I wrote a while ago to say it would be a tragedy to overlook the youth of today and yet keep asking whenever we are in our boardrooms or conferences, what is happening to the youth? The energy and the vigor of youth without guidance or a model of leadership to look up to is prone to chaos. But note this, the same energy, if it is correctly channeled, is productive. I will use a quote by O.R. Tambo that was referenced a lot on this platform, particularly in Youth Month, to say the children of any nation are its future. A country, a people, a movement that does not pay attention to its youth or children does not deserve its future. Therefore, let us mind the gap. I always say the youth of today are leaders of today, not necessarily just tomorrow. They are leaders of today. Youth leadership should not be deferred, lest we continue to speak of it as another dream. When we speak of leadership, youth leadership in particular, we should think of it as a matter and a concern of today versus tomorrow. And this will effectively be drilled and cascaded into how we teach our boys and girls, how we groom and coach our ladies and gents, what we instill in them, not just in the words that we speak like I am doing today, but how we teach them in the way we carry ourselves, taking note that we are only able to breed after our own kind. Therefore, as we lead, let us mind the gap. It was quite exciting to listen to President Ramaphosa's appointment of the Triple BE Advisory Council, inclusive of youth, one of whom the participants or the leads there happens to be my former classmate. And my prayer was that their voices in such platforms should not be silenced, because the future that we look toward demands an integration, a blend and a fusion of ideas and voices, where young people and the mature, as I choose to categorize them, in various platforms can be treated as equals. And we need to allow young people to have their voices heard. And this is what we mean by minding the gap. If you would allow me to give practical examples, which I often communicate to my peers and colleagues in industry, on how do we bridge this gap, this generational leadership divide, I always give examples to say, let us consider things like board shadowing. I always say most of the time, if you look at boards, they are comprised largely of the mature generation, like I said, as I used to categorize them, the older generation. And I ask myself, how do we not integrate or create a room to bring our young people there in? Remember, board selection, as an example, is not selected on the basis of agreeableness, but on the basis of independence. So if we are going to look at board leadership, board shadowing, let us consider that our young people think a little bit wild. They think outside of the box, and we need to be prepared to bring them on those platforms to challenge our views and perhaps open our eyes to perspectives that we possibly may be ignorant of. Things like the youth parliament. I was quite excited to see that the province that I currently reside in, which is KwaZulu-Natal, is having a youth parliament this Friday. And I was quite excited because it is such platforms that enable the youth of our generation to be well acquainted with the policies that govern the nation within which they live. And I said to myself, why don't we replicate the same models? For example, in rural areas, have young people emulate the parliament sittings, have young people enact positions such as president, minister of economics, minister of trade and industry, minister of agriculture, because in that way we allow them to think of the type of leadership that they themselves will be willing to subject themselves to. We are sometimes surprised when young people do not vote when elections come, and it is because they do not know, they don't find the practicality or their place in a society, which yet they will continue to live for generations to come. The schools debates, let us resuscitate school debates. A lot of young people, if you converse with them today about the education policy, about the trade policy, about policy around agriculture. They do not know what is going on, but whose fault is it? If we consider to mind the gap and bring them onto these platforms, we will not be only be preparing or cultivating a youth for today, but even for generations to come. Perhaps let us make such kind of initiatives trend on social media, such as TikTok, instead of the jokes, which, although I acknowledge that they do make us laugh, but I ask myself, if that's all that we giggle and find an interest in, where is our youth or our country going? I always say people go on to board positions because of the money that it pays, because it does pay well. But it's not about the money or the fame, but it is about the intergenerational baton, depending on which school you come from, the mentorship, the values that shape and will continue to shape our society. Therefore, I will echo again, let us continue to mind the gap. I wrote a quote a couple of days ago to say, leadership is a heart thing and management is a mind thing. And blessed is the one who finds a balance between the two. And I said, if it is a heart thing, like a virtue, it therefore has to be passed on. We need to understand that irrespective of how incredible we can be in our current roles as leaders, and this I'm addressing both the young and the old that are currently occupying leadership roles, if we do not pass on the leadership lessons, the leadership virtues, the leadership principles that govern and anchor a society that is productive, we need to understand that we cannot take these roles to the grave. So leadership, as it is a hard thing, like a virtue, remember we need to pass it on like a baton. And if you would allow me, as I draw to a closing, I wrote a piece as the Youth Month opened, beginning of June this year. And I'd like to read it and share it with the audience today. To say Youth Month will continue to mean nothing unless we are intentional about bridging the gap, until we understand that young people are ready and able to chart their own path. The future is theirs, and at a point in time, which happens to be now, we have to trust them with the responsibility to make decisions about a world within which they will continue to live for generations to come. If we spare them of this responsibility, we are only creating a young people that will continue to point a finger of blame to the older generation. We need to be bold enough to allow them to make mistakes from which they will learn. In any case, no leadership is without error. And to the mature generation, whom we so much love, continue to guide us, but do not stand in our way. And as I draw to a close, I'd like to draw back to the tale that I started with about the old lady that constantly visited the train station, and say, perhaps this evening, or even post this conversation, and the contributions that will be made even in tonight's conversation, let us all take a walk to the train station of our lives. And while we wait there, with opportunities before our eyes, with doors that are continuing to open, with deals that we are continuing to clinch, may this voice and this phrase echo in our minds before we board onto the next opportunity. How do we mind the gap? Nelson Mandela says, it falls upon a generation to be great, and we can be that generation. Happy Youth Day in advance, and I thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, Paulina. Thank you. Powerful as usual. I mean, powerful as usual. Really, you've given us powerful nuggets to converse on, to engage each other on. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time when you can ask the questions or your question. You can raise your hand, then we'll acknowledge you, or you can write it in the chat room. The idea here, whenever we meet here, we meet as I said earlier on, as leaders, and we are here to engage each other and to sharpen each other. So your views, your contribution will be highly will be highly needed, will be highly highly appreciated, because and highly valued, because we are here for each other. Now that I don't see any hands yet, Martha, you'll assist me there in the chat room. I don't see any hands yet, but okay, before I comment or say anything, I can see a hand there from one of our past speakers here, that is Mr. Michael Tabane. Michael, over to you, sir, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I really enjoyed the topic. I enjoyed the presentation by our amazing sister Paulina. Every time when she speaks, like I really like, you know, make sure that I have a book handy, so that I can take on my notes and everything. So I learned a lot today. So what I want to find out from you, Paulina, is that with everything that is happening in the world today, you know, especially as a young leader, what I learned is something that I did not know. Like I was told that in the animal kingdom, the female elephant is actually the one that leads, not the not the male one. I did not know that. And then they say it's because human beings are the only species that elect leaders on gender and other things. But animals, they elect leaders based on calmness, confidence, and stability. The more stable a leader is, like shows confidence and calmness, is the one that they select as the leader of the pack. And then fortunately enough, with elephants, female elephants are more stable and calm and confident than the male one. The male one, the energy is all over the place. That's why they are not selected as the leaders of the pack. So what I want to understand from you is that, as the leader of the pack, as the female leader of the pack, what do you do to stay calm, to stay confident, to make sure that you are always, you know, like you're always within the frame or the domain of qualities that make you act in a way that you do act. Qualities that make us see you the way we see you, as a formidable, amazing leader that you are. What are your secrets, man, so that we can share with some of the sisters who are not here, and brothers as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Prof, through you, if I can take that question. By the way, thanks for educating me about how elephants actually appoint their leaders. One thing that I always highlight in terms of leadership, and I like the fact that you sort of directed the question to me, is the notion of being true to yourself. I think a lot of times in the space of leadership, we try to be like the next person. It is okay to emulate, because the word emulate in a sense means you are able to learn and pick up the traits from somebody that you look up to, but then you allow yourself to be a little better, or actually cross the boundaries, but narrowing or anchoring that entire journey around who you truly are. One of the things that has assisted me as a young leader in my space is making sure that I'm genuinely true to myself. I always encourage people that I interact with to say, take this different test that actually assess your true values, your core values. Who are you? What do you stand for? Because then they assist you in the decisions that you make, the jobs that you take on, the roles, the opportunities, even the speaking platforms that I select. It's always on the basis of how do these align to my truest values? And it is on the basis of my values or my value system that I build confidence to be able to navigate through. A young lady asked previously on this very platform about an issue of personality. And I said, it's not about being loud or being quiet, but it's about being true. Because if you lead from the truest sense of yourself, that's when you are able to make an impact, versus when you're trying to imitate someone, because at that point in time, you will reach a level where you cannot go beyond, because now you've lost the manuscript of who that person is. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. I really appreciate it. I'm well answered. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Michael and Pauline. Thanks a lot. Martha, anything in the chat room?
Good evening, young leaders and young leaders at heart. Thank you, Prof. Indeed, I think we should just start showering Paulina with some beautiful comments from our leaders. Sis Daily earlier said that I am emotional, powerful, and profound. Then we come on to Dr. Linda Peter, who is saying, as a 1976 student who is now in the matured category, I'm emotional and proud of you as the young leader for such a powerful presentation, deep from your heart. Then we had Mr. MT Tabani, who just spoke earlier, saying that was truly amazing. Thank you so much, Paulina. Then we do have a question from Maji Mulukwane, who is saying, how do we change the mentality of commemorating the Youth Month by either the youth itself and organizations? There is that gap that the Black child does not see. How can we help in making the gap more visible? So over to you, Paulina.
Interesting. Thank you for the question. And I mean, I always say to my friends whenever I deliver a speech or contribute to a conversation, to say the best thing to ever do is be able to open the platform for more comments and inputs as well, because as we speak, we also allow ourselves to learn. But to respond to that particular question is, the truth be told, young people are looking for tangible opportunities. And perhaps instead of giving you a theoretical answer, I'll give you a practical answer of an initiative that I was recently involved in, called the Empower Youth Week, that took place in Orange Farm. And today I was just getting the stats of about 775 young people employed. And this initiative was just for a week. 775 young people in employment, 45 enterprises that have been actually funded, 365 young people who got bursaries to empower themselves. Now imagine after a week's intervention in a community such as Orange Farm, with such tangible results, a young person that was far from any form of opportunity on the outskirts of Johannesburg, they had ministers and prominent people, influencers, young people that came to speak to them, but did not just speak to them, but deliver tangible results to them. The next time you want to talk to them about Youth Month, youth commemoration, elections, voting, they are able to see the impact. And therefore, in that regard, their mind is shaped. I said something during my speech that we do not shape only by the words that we communicate, but how we carry ourselves and the tangible things that we are able to deliver to young people, because that is the only way a person can emulate. As they always say, a young child does not listen to mommy saying, don't swear. They listen to whether you use the same vocab which you are telling them not to use. So young people's minds are transformed by tangible things, because if you are hungry, as one writer said, you do not need a prayer or a motivational speech, but you need a slice of bread. And if we are able to bring the tangibility of results closer to young people, then we can start talking about reshaping their minds. And perhaps the commemoration and celebration of Youth Month will be done in a much better way. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much. And Paulina's, ladies and gentlemen, is really challenged, as I see Michael want to come back there. And maybe we'll allow Michael to come back, but as she's coming back, I would like us to really think about this generational gap, because it's very important. How can a baby boomer, Mr. Andre Young, Bishop Birikis and others, how can a baby boomer effectively and efficiently managed a Generation X or Y person? Because a baby boomer is someone who was so loyal to the workplace, someone who knew that or was waiting for that award when you must be given that 30 years tie or 30 years or rather 30 years watch. That you see, and now I'm just waiting for 2 years. In 2 years I'll get that watch. So nowadays, as Paulina is saying, young people are not like that, so there is that tension within generation. And I see this because I work a lot with executives and with companies, and I also coach a lot of people. You see this, and I would like us to tackle that, but I see so many hands. Now let me acknowledge, or Michael is lowered down, his hand. So I see my brother there, Mazwe Majola, will be followed by Sis Daly, and then Sis Daly will be followed there by Dr. Sibongiseni, our past speaker who was here last week. In that order, please, for now, we go to Mazwe. After Mazwe, Sis Daly, after Sis Daly, Dr. Sibongiseni. Over to you, Mr. Mulugwan.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thanks for the response from Pauline. Thanks very much. But the question which I still have is that, yes, there are these initiatives which have been done, and there's a huge uptake. Maybe let's say we've got so many students or so many youth who are given opportunities. But are these opportunities permanent opportunities or just temporary opportunities? That's number one. Number two, what are organizations doing in order to help and to close this gap? I know there's an organization, I don't know if they've already advertised that, they are calling this a 76 challenge, whereby they are looking for 76 organizations to employ 76 youth. So it's going to be 76 by 76 youth, which will be employed. About 570 something will be employed. But now, what are other organizations doing, and what is the government doing also in order to assist? I'm not talking about a temporary employment or stuff like that, but we need permanent employment. And the other problem is this thing of the grants that most of our youth are dependent on, without even thinking of going to go and hustle to go and make honest living. So this is where my concern is, that yes, there is some initiatives being done by the government, but is it a permanent initiative or is it just a temporary initiative? And what are organizations doing, especially the private sector, in order to help in identifying the gap and closing the gap? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. If I can try and respond to that, but again, I'll acknowledge the fact that, please, colleagues, do feel free to jump in. I'm also a student in learning. Those that know, as I'm a serial studier, so I always want to learn from everyone else. Thank you so much for the question, Tate Molokwane. With regards to some of the programs that are offered, and I will acknowledge that there are a few that get into permanent employment. There are a few that get into temporary employment. I did say that during my address, that as much as there are pockets of interventions that are taking place, more can be done. But as we look towards the more, let us not undermine the small steps that are being taken. I'll say this because as a young person coming from Limpopo, came to Gauteng, and the first opportunity I got was an internship, and it was just for 12 months. But it was the exposure that I got within the internship that enabled me to further develop myself, to be able to hustle, as we would call it, apply for permanent position. And I was fortunate, I have to admit, in a generation with such high statistics of unemployment, to be able to better myself and to get a permanent employment. So I do acknowledge that the temporary employments are frustrating. I have a lot of young people that would talk to me about such, but let us not overlook the small pockets of interventions. It is a good start. But again, to respond to the second portion that you talked about, what are organizations doing? I will open that question to the rest of the floor. I want to touch on the issue of grants. And this will sound like it's a bit in the opposite direction of my initial response to the question that was asked previously. To say, one thing that we need to instill in bridging the generational leadership divide is how we teach our young people to be able to manage resources, or to be able to manage the opportunities or even the spaces within which they find themselves. Steve Harvey put it this way: it's not about the money that you leave for your children, or in this instance, it's not about the grants that are being given, but it's about what we instill in young people. And I know I'm talking ceteris paribus, all things constant, because I know there are some situations where people have to take care of their families, etc. But most of the time, if we do not teach our young people to be able to make more from little, because that is a principle, that is a lesson that governs your mind, so that when you have 10 rand, you sort of try and find, how do I make it 20 rand? If we do not spend time in coaching sessions, in teaching, not just focusing on IQ, but AQ, EQ, those different quotients that enable us to manage our resources effectively, then the mindset is, I will go and stand in the queue next month and wait for the next 350. But if the mindset is to say, do more with the little that you have, as I stand in the queue, I'm trying to think, can I bake and sell this bucket so that my 350 turns into 600 rands or 700 rands? So there's more to be done, and it starts in the household. How we coach our young boys and girls, our young ladies and gents, as I put it, what is it that we teach them? Do we make the grant funding something popular, or do we create it to say it is a base? Government tried something, don't have an entitlement mentality, but try and take the little that you have to try and look for the next opportunity, so that you are able to multiply on that first initial 350 or whatsoever grant that you may have received. That is my contribution, and I did say I'm open to hear what other colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Should I jump in, or should I join the queue?
Yes,
I don't know.
You can do that, Mr. Young. Thank you very much, and thank you. I know that you are coming from a session that you are addressing at 4, but thank you so much that you straight from there you came to this one. Yeah, over to you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Professor Mazwe Majola. All protocols observed, Paulina. That guy's Pongiseni there, he had his hand up. He must bring his voice. I'm born in the 60s. I grew up with a whip on my back in this country. No grant. A whip on my back as a black man. And let me tell you, they got me to run. Run from the whip, run to the opportunity. But we had this saying growing up, Amandla! And then the response would be, away too. But there was a commonly held understanding and connection that we will help each other, we will serve each other, we will fight for change. That was the collective consciousness at the time. If we're going to bridge the gap, go into the history of this country, the bridge was us holding that common collective conscious that we will change things. Stop waiting for the government. I think they must cancel this 350. Cancel it. Money is an absolute addiction like cocaine. It only holds value based on the face printed on it, but you know, it doesn't bring trust and collective accountability to what I must do. Money disables people. I earn money. I'm not given it. I was given the whip, not given money. I was given the collective consciousnness. I was given the programming. I was given the conditioning. You must create your future. You must create your neighbor's future. Together we'll stand. And I think, Paulina, the bridge is not built from one side, where the government, the corporates, the parents, the mentors. No, man. Young people, vuka uzenzele. Vuka. And I'm talking as a parent because I got 4 youngsters here and I'm kicking their asses right now. And I'm saying, wake up, do it yourself. Come on. No money. You know, it takes nothing to get up in the morning, wash your face. And if you can't wash your face, go out there and go and help somebody. Go and do service for somebody. You know, it's simple. My mother used to say it. And this is a commonly held principle across the globe. I don't care what the geography, what the politics, what the conflicts, what the culture, what the competition, what the currency. Help people. On Youth Day, my call, Professor Mazwe Majola, to the youth is help people. Help them. Help them and start with this fulfillment of making a difference for another without the expectation of return. And let me tell you what that will do. It will invite to you, in that purity of helping another, value in return. Not 350. The government must cancel this 350. And if they want to continue with this 350, they must bring it with terms and conditions. If I give you the 350, show me who you've helped. I'll leave it there.
Wow. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
thank you. Thanks, Mr. Young. Thanks, my brother. And now we will take my sister there, Deli. Deli will be followed by Dr. Sibongsen, and then I acknowledge Hlumelo. Hlumelo will come after Dr. Sibongsen. Deli, over to you, my sister.
Thank you, Prof. And also through you. Thank you, Paulina. And I must make a disclaimer. This is the first time I hear you speak. And it's so much with great applauding to hear such a young person speak such an in-depth wisdom of path of leadership at this young age. Because we can all argue and also speak from an experience, because leadership is a journey, because it's a reflection of followership. And I think what you touch on is a topic that is so neglected, of followership, because the more followers you have, it shows how well you have closed the gap, whether in a good way or in a destructive way. Thank you very much. You made me to cry. Reflect particularly on the journey of the train station. That is a real take home. And coming back to the realities of the Big Five, and I do applaud Mr. Tabani to remind us that corporate world is the big jungle. There's the Big Five, there's the humble animals, and I think leadership belongs in the Big Five. And how well you take care of your foes, and how well you can destroy your praise. And along the path of that, I would like to reflect also as leaders on some of the things that we always speak down to our youth, and particularly by the former State SA Commissioner when he was interviewed. He says we are living in a Gwara youth society. And I took a stop and I'm like, what the heck is this? And I was very interested to say, but why did he say a Gwara youth? Means that our youth is confused, but who created that confusion? You've just said it, which is the prey. You said you will, not the prey, you will breed what will come out. And the key question as leaders is, what are we breeding from home, from communities, into the society, into universities, in the place of work, whether you are in a public, private, or state-owned? What are you feeding? And in that feed, what kind of a gap are you creating? Are you creating a gap of what I've learned in my path of learning, that the more you want to hold on leadership, you become a psychopath? And many leaders, shareholders, like psychopaths because they make things going. Profit margins goes up, ROE goes up, HEPS goes up, strategic initiatives are going up. It's because of the psychopath darkness of making things to happen, whereas behind the scene, there's no reflection of the gap to bridge in terms of generations that are coming into the workplace. Narcissist. Are you a leader, which is a narcissist? Or are you a leader who is classified under Machiavellism? You choose. Or are you going to be a leader that is well-renowned, like Nelson Mandela said, if you are a best leader, make the people to lead and make them believe that, you know what, they are leading, whereas you are leading them from the back. And unfortunately, factually, the result is all of us, we want to lead in the front. Talk, 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 as you said, we talk, but the actions are different. So how do we then reach out to young people based on age? How do we reform them? Because the most important thing is to have a mental renewal of moving from a grant mentality, entitlement, to value creation, of giving, creating, and making sure that there is a long-lasting legacy from a value chain feeding of leadership. The ones that are well-positioned, we have to speak the honest truth. One, you need to have a sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor, you can sweat as much as you can in the bathroom, and you can sweat as much as you can, but by grace, you will get that position. But the sponsor is the one that will speak on your behalf, even if when you are not around. So the challenge that we need to ask as leaders, who are you sponsoring? Not in a destructive way, in an ethical way. I also came across an article around leadership that for Elon Musk to be where he is, her mother also sat in a boardroom with somebody to say, please, can you fund my son to be successful the way you are? It was not corruption. It was purely merely a sponsorship for every child, for every person, for every leader needs to have a proper sponsorship, either in a funding, in coaching, in mentoring, and creating opportunities for our youth, for everyone, because the reason why other leaders are holding is because they grew up holding onto things. Are you with me? So they don't know when to let go. So we are also dealing with historical challenges, where we want to be and how we move forward. So when we are in a very diverse generational inroads, the key question is, how do we complement one another? How do we embrace multi-diversity of thoughts without being emotional, without even sabotaging and even corporate bullying one another? Gender-based violence is something else because it's visible. But corporate bullying is mental abuse, mental illness, whereby you just want to say something, but somebody, even if you said it, nobody acknowledges you. It's discrimination. So how do we bring along all of us, especially youth, to have a voice that they know that we are going to be heard? And for us to be heard, it's not necessary for us to run around on the streets and toy. And I remember when there was a rally around this, the fees must fall. People were like, these people. I raised a hand in a boardroom. I said, no, the same young people, they are our children, they are our brothers, they are our sisters or whoever. But at the same time, they are the future leaders of organizations. If they don't like something, they will go and toy and forget that they are leaders. The question is, how do we come up with a reformation program back to universities to start inculcating the vision and creating a different set of picture? So it is such a very daunting position where we are, but there is hope. There is opportunity. One or two can definitely bring the change. And thank you for being so vocal, so aggressive and critical about how we move together without competing, but complementing one another when it comes to generational leadership movement. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sis Daly. Thank you so much. Let's move to Dr. Sibongiseni.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you. Also, special thanks to our guest speaker, Paulina. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and wisdom in this important topic. I really enjoy your talk from the beginning up until the end. You spoke with conviction and competence. I must commend you on your phenomenal presentation skills. Thank you so much. I wish I can speak fluently and flawlessly like you. So wow. I admire that so much. Now I want to make a comment and also ask a very quick question. It will be a quick one from me in terms of the comparison that you made. And I love that so much, the comparison you made between leadership and management. I might be misquoting you, but you will correct me if I'm wrong. You said something along the lines of leadership is a heart thing and management is a mind thing. And I think you went on to say blessed is the one who finds the balance between the two. And I love that so much. I've never had someone putting it that way. And now my question is, also to borrow your terms in terms of the topic for tonight, which was minding the gap, especially with the youth, observing, of course, what has been happening in different spheres of leadership. My question is this: I think in nowadays, we are more focused on equipping ourselves to be better leaders, right? We are more often neglecting the side of management, which is also important if you look, especially if you consider corporate, because there are titles there. You might be, a manager of a certain department or of the whole company. So now my question is, looking at those two parts of the body, the analogy you use, the mind and the heart, leadership, of course, being the most important, the heart is like the most important thing, most important organ in the body. So my question is this: how do we bridge this gap? Because we are more into learning about leadership, we are neglecting management. How do we bring the balance so that we can be both efficient and also effective in what we do, so that we can achieve the desired results? Because I believe if we want to see the change that we aspire to see in the world, firstly, it's an internal thing. You change yourself for the better, and then the world around you will be better. So how do we manage or teach the youth to improve their management skills, and also to bring the balance between this skill which is needed, which is leadership? So how do we bring the balance, or bring the balance, or bridge the gap between those two? So I hope I'm not confusing you with this question. I won't go any further. I will leave it there. Hopefully you understood. And if you're not, you can say it, and then I will explain again briefly. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc. Prof, through you, if I can take the question. I like the example you also used, Doc, in the sense that the heart is, you said it's the most important organ in the body. I would say it anchors you, because for as long as your heart is still beating, you can live and become effective and productive and relevant in this world. So the heart thing is what we talk to in terms of the abstract value system, the morals that actually anchor us as individuals. And I think as much as we rush in our education system, in our corporate society, what we check for when we even occupy roles, or we apply for roles, or we search for candidates, we look at the mind thing, which is the IQ. And we forget the emotional quotient, the attitude quotient, which relates to the heart thing. And I think it is important that first in our education system, or even in our workplaces, we embark on exercises that enable people to come to terms with the core, the fundamentals, the value systems. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Because then when we come to management, which is the management of resources, then you are able to manage, or to be able to function in your particular roles anchored on a value system. The reason we have things such as corruption, or young people going into roles for the big buck, but forgetting the value add, which Sis Daly talked about earlier on, is because we do not have a value system which anchors us. I remember Tate Young that spoke a bit earlier on about how the previous generation was whipped very hard, unlike just being given grants. As much as it was a painful experience, but if one thing you notice about the older generation is there's a value system upon which they are anchored. I mean, of course, there are others that have lost maybe the value system or decide they don't care anymore. But if we are able to first establish who we are as individuals, what is it that we value? What is it, the social cohesion, the community which as Africans we were born with? If we are able to establish that within us as individuals, being taught from a young age that this is what we value, whatever you do, make sure that you think of the value that you are able to add to greater society. Then when it comes to management and taking on roles in bigger society, that will always anchor what we do. I'll give you a practical example. If right now I'm overseeing a tender in government as I'm a public servant, as much as I may know family members or friends that are capable or can do the thing, my value system says no. Make them aware that it's out in the government gazette, like any other person that is not related to you that would know about it. Let them compete for it. And it is my value system that then directs how I will manage those resources, which is the funds of that particular tender, to be able to make a particular delivery. Meaning that whoever even bids, when I sit in the committees to question, I don't question them on the basis of whether I know them or not. Going back again, it is the hard thing of leading that actually anchors me to say, I will apply this particular mental or organizational principle, which is management, to be able to ensure an accurate value add into what we are trying to achieve as government and as a country as a whole. So I hope I've answered your question. That is my response. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paulina. I am answered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Doc, and thanks to Paulina. We'll take Shumelo, and then Brother Shumelo will be followed. Probably our last, we'll take our last hand there. We can see Dr. Chuma Mangisa after Shumelo. Shumelo, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Paulina, as well. That was a great presentation. I truly enjoyed it, delivered with so much passion and very concise, very clear. I learned a great deal from the presentation. Thank you so much. Prof, I see you. Good evening, colleagues. Look, many have argued that development in Africa will continue to be a mere illusion as long as the concept of development doesn't take into account peculiar African cultural realities. And we're talking here cultural and traditional norms that pervade inter and intra-ethnic relations, for instance, that teach young people to respect their elders as a standard, that teach people in general to respect African customs as we have been practicing them monotonously since time immemorial. And mine is to direct our thinking towards culture as a central tenet in the evolution of intergenerational relationships as they play out in the corporate space with diversity, the diversity of races being an issue as well here in South Africa mostly, as they play out in the political arena, in the family, in the church and so on. It must, however, be acknowledged that great strides have been made in the last few decades in how we equitably provide opportunities to both girl and boy children. But I was satisfied in the manner in which we are bringing up young people and preparing them for leadership in society. Are we giving them a voice loud enough to impact the kind of decisions that are being made on their behalf? You know, if you look at the African Union's Agenda 2063, I mean, how much of that emanated from youth quotas? If you look at the National Planning Commission that was put together in 2009, how much of that was composed of young people? I will take this opportunity as well to congratulate the President for the composition of the Triple BE advisory structure that was recently constituted. But I go back to the question, are we happy, are we satisfied that we're giving young people the ability and the space to mold a vision by themselves for their own future? You know, and if we are not satisfied with an answer, I submit that we ought to be asking, what are some of the cultural and traditional norms that perhaps we need to tweak, you know, to suit a 21st century situation where everyone wants to be heard, you know, in the family, in the office, in the lecture room, at church, etc. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. If I can just respond to Fumelo's point. Thank you for your scholarly question. I always appreciate how people create context and they take you through a body of literature to be able to come to a point. And I think one of the things that interestingly, my PhD study, one of the anchoring concepts is culture, and I'm looking at individual cultural identity. And to respond to your point, I want to highlight the importance of ambidexterity in our current day and age. If we talk about an ambidextrous person, we talk about somebody that's able to use their left and their right hand equally. And I'm bringing this to respond to your question to say the same way we talk about blacks and whites existing in the same space, young and old existing in the same space, we need to be intentional to create environment that is able to accommodate the two. And perhaps to respond to your question, let me start with young people. As young people now, we are becoming bolder, more assertive. We are able to raise our voices. We have our views, etc. But that should never be done at the expenses of the core morals that unite the African society, which is respect, which is honoring older people. And I'm one person, having been a greater part of the time, the youngest in the class, the youngest in the boardroom, the youngest in many spaces. I always say, if the older generation realizes that you respect them, it is not difficult for them to give you a room to put your voice across. So the one mistake that I note as young people making is, because I'm educated, I get to a space with arrogance to say no old people is going to tell me anything here. I know what I'm doing. This is how things are supposed to be done. I learned this in my strategy lecture. This is how it should be done. But instead, if you allow yourself to sit and learn, and I mean intentionally will to learn, not just to sit there and listen is okay, thanks for making your presentation. This is what I think. There are so many things that happened in the older generation's dispensation that are happening now. They are exactly the same. It's just that they are happening in a different era. So the fact that it worked then does not mean it won't necessarily work now. It's about us being broad-minded enough to be able to be aware of it, learn it, try and see how we work around it, realizing that these are the very things that anchored and created that social cohesion and growth for the development of our country up to this far. So ambidexterity is really important in our day and age to say, culture still anchors us. So it doesn't matter whether we study in the US or wherever, let us not lose the core values that enable us to be able to function as a society. The same way you still expected to respect your parents at home, even in the boardroom, it still becomes relevant. So it doesn't mean that because you know better, that you don't need to respect any other view because you feel it's from an older generation. So that is my view to say, if we are going to have leadership that is functional, we cannot lose sight of the fact that there are teachings that anchored us when we were still little. I'm older now, but I still listen to my mom, not because I don't have a choice, but it's because I realize that these are teachings that anchor me, that support me, that develop me as an older person. I mean, as a young person becoming older, and one day I will need to pass the same to my generation to say, you still respect, irrespective of you being from Harvard, you still respect your parents, you still respect your colleagues, not because there's a gun to your head, but it is a value that anchors who you truly are. Thank you.
Powerful, powerful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll take Dr. Chuma Mangisa, and then after Chuma Mangisa, we'll ask Paulina to respond, but also to give us parting shots, then we'll close the session. Dr. Mangisa.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much to Paulina as well. What an insightful expression of leadership, that talks to how best we can blend, the generational gap. A powerful presentation indeed. A 2014 study by Deloitte on diversity confirms exactly what you are saying. It says younger directors are at their 50s. We should be ashamed if we are saying a director who's at 50 is a younger director. We should be very ashamed. That was a study in 2014, by Deloitte and Touche. And another one by IOD, Institute of Directors, in 2018. It then said 9% of directors are younger than 35. That's a disaster. If therefore the majority, which is 65%, is over than that age, indeed, it then tells us that as a country, something is not right with us as a country. However, I want to challenge, even us as this community here, because there's a phrase, that you spoke to where you said, we must lift as we rise. Within this community of us as leaders, are we mentoring a few of those that we have identified, that we have identified potential, for them to be as leaders? Because I know talk is cheap, but action, is quite hard. I want to challenge some of us, that we need to begin to practicalize that which we are saying, to say, let's bridge the generational gap so that as we grow older, from a transformational leadership point of view, as we grow older, at least there are people who are prepared, to take over. My parting shot, Prof. When we talk about leadership, to a certain extent, we talk about visibility, of people who are leading. Now, if we look at our politics, the kind of leaders that are visible now, that we see in our current politics, these leaders are not inspiring. If they are inspiring or influencing, they are influencing our youth, our young people to begin to believe that's the way perhaps we have to lead the society, by being corrupt and so forth and so forth. Otherwise, for me, a powerful presentation, you have nipped it in the bud. If we don't bridge this generational gap, we are doomed as a society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Doc. Maybe Paulina, before you respond, sorry, my sister, let's just check with Martha if there are any, so that you can just put everything together. Any comments there or questions in the chat room, and then Paulina will then do the closing remarks and responding as she is responding. To you, Martha. Yes, my sister.
Yes, Prof. Wrapping up from this side, I think let's just take about 2 comments. One coming from Mr. Maxwell Berikis is saying, thanks leadership for a great dialogue, and to Sis Paulina for the nuggets of wisdom shared. Indeed, nothing for the youth without them. For the old timers, knowing knowing when to hand over the baton is key and shouldn't be painful to do. For the young people, proudly standing on the shoulders of the elders without trampling on them is a great gift. At the end of the day, respect and charity remain non-negotiable. And Mr. Young coming back again to say that this thinking partnering with the youth is a partnership that must be committed to by the baby boomers. And perhaps the last one, let's take one from Becky Ngwane saying, very powerful. It boils down to us influencing our surrounding in terms of bridging the gap. Instead of only focusing on the broader society, let us look at those closest to us and make an impact. And with that, we're signing off from this side. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks, Martha. I think there's another one from Buitumelo there saying powerful and enlightening session. My teen daughter needs to listen to this recording. I will definitely ask for this recording. Thanks, Buitumelo. Mr. Taban, I saw your hand. Is it, as I always say that when we used to be with the SRC in the university, there is something they used to call it point of exigence, comrade. Point of exigence. Is it point of exigence before we close, Mr. Taban?
No, thank you so much, Prof. So the point that I wanted to make was actually made. So I don't like to insist when we say "Kilami Leo." So you just say something that was already said by others. So, but thank you so much for the session today. Because the point I wanted to make was from a message that I got from Dade Young when he told me that, you know, perspective is important. He sent me a private message a while back saying that if we lose perspective, like we lose touch because of our perception on what things mean, they drive how we think about them and then how they affect us. So that's the point I wanted to make. But a number of speakers, they actually alluded to that, you know, just in a different way. But nonetheless, thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. Paulina, you can respond to some of these comments and observations and questions. And also, if you can give us your parting shots, and then I'll close the session after you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, and thank you, colleagues. Yeah, my heart is just swelling with joy and with all humility, grateful for the contributions and the comments that you've made. I did highlight to say I'm a serial studier, and in life I've taught myself whatsoever conversation, even if it's 5 minutes, I need to be ready to learn, because that's the only way as leaders we get to empower ourselves. So thank you so much. I just want to touch on some of the comments that Young mentioned. Interestingly, the slogan Amandla Awetu, and it constantly reminds me to say, as a collective, that's when we get to lead. Yes, in our different jobs, we have our titles singularly, but we are leaders in collective. I always say to other leaders that come to speak on this platform to say, I celebrate them, I celebrate the lessons that we share, because you've got to realize as a leader that you cannot do it alone if we are to change and reshape this country. The other point was the fact that the bridge is not built from one side. And is still echoing in my mind to say, as much as we are requesting and expecting the older generation to help bridge the gap, young people, let us be eager to learn from them. Let us be humble enough to sit under their tutelage, to be able to learn the lessons from the past, integrate them with what we know, to be able to become better people. Consistently as we are leading as well, be it you are in junior management, middle management, or you're still starting, look around you, the interns that are coming in, how do you empower them? I can tell you, if you come and work in my team, I will make sure that before your tenure ends within a space of 6 months, I've gotten you to a course or something, because my goal is to say, if I happen to not work with you in future, or maybe you are to get a job elsewhere, who do you become? How do you grow and make sure that you are able to become better and possibly even occupy a role higher than where you possibly see me to be at the current moment? So as we are occupying roles in our different spaces, always search for an opportunity. Try and Teach a young person. If there's a book that you are reading that's empowering you, share it with them. If there's an internship that you know about, share it with them. If there's an assignment they're struggling with, that is how we empower, because it becomes the practicality of leading. Thank you so much again for the constant reminder about value creation. Also, elicited up that we must remember that as leaders, it's not just about us talking or becoming popular on platforms, but let us long to create value so that even when we lead in the spaces where we are able to create that value. Let us continue to lift as we rise, and allow me to close with this. And this is particularly to the young people in celebration of Youth Month and Youth Day tomorrow. Always remember the difference between the young and the old is not just the gray hairs that the old have acquired, but the years of wisdom which have enabled them to be who they are today. So let us be ready to learn. Even as we bridge the gap, let us meet them halfway, because the future is ours and we are to lead this world even going forward. Thank you so much.
Very insightful indeed, as Dr. Mangisa said, very thought-provoking, informative, instructive, powerful presentation. And thank you so much, Pauline, as you always do when you address us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. As I said earlier on, to those who've joined us for the first time, please do join us again next week. We meet every Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Just block your Wednesdays 6 p.m. Just that's what we must do. So that you must just tell people that I don't take any appointment on a Wednesday at 6 p.m. So block it, because your date must be here in this or with this community of leaders. So thank you so much. We'll meet again next week with another powerful speaker, as we always do, also with another topic. And thank you so much. Please do join us on our Facebook page. It's called the Leadership Think Tank, and you can just join us there, and then we'll continue with the leadership discussion there. Other than that, thank you so much to everyone of you.
Thank you so
great
much.
speakers.
Thank you.
Great speakers, or rather great speakers, sorry, and great participants, great leaders, scholars, to everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks to Sis Martha for co-sharing and assisting tonight, and to everyone who's here tonight. Thank you. We'll see you again next Wednesday. Thank you. Goodbye. The session is adjourned now. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you.